All right, so let's just talk a bit of what does compliance look like right now in the Nigerian space, right? So especially for fintech startup. I know there are a lot of fintechs that, for example, the Flutterwave, the Paystack, they're already big in the industry, right? So for people who are still very much new, like founders that are just building, what is the entrance for them? What is compliance really for them? Is it very smooth sale for them to, get started, or is this something that they still have to put a lot of resources and energy in? Is there even a chance for, young startup who are probably haven't even raised any seeds or
All right. So yeah, what the fintech compliance landscape looks like. All right. Depends so much on what kind of company you're providing compliance to. We as an employee, as an external consultant, have done both. And sometimes the approach would differ depending on what angle you're coming from. So fintech is a rather broad term that you can use to describe companies that are applying technology to provide financial products, right? Financial services. So it could be banking service, collecting deposits, it could be lending service, lending investments like Rice Vest, and more recently, it could be a crypto digital asset service, of course. So depending on the kind of service you provide, there are regulatory obligations you have to comply with, right? You see the CBN here now, you see the CBN regulating the banking and lending spaces. In some cases, you'll find at the local or state level that there are some state regulators as well for lending. For crypto, you find the Securities and Exchange Commission taking a lot more serious stance on crypto regulation. And you find regulators pretty much clamping down their legs more recently. So in terms of trends, right, we are seeing increasing regulatory action in Africa. We started to see some action from bodies you really consider to be fintech regulators, right? Like the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission coming on board to say you need to stop adverse or bad lending practices, right? Trying to curb the excesses of some practitioners in this space by introducing some form of registration. So to assure that, you've gone through some level of regulatory supervision before you are even able to list on the Play Store or App Store or whatever distributor you're using, right? We're seeing increasing regulatory action. What would this mean, right, for startups? It means that right from when you are ideating your product, before you even start building, it's very advisable for you to involve compliance professionals, right? It could be at a consulting level, depending on your pockets, really. Get a consultant or get an in-house counsel, in-house compliance person. Let them review what you have, let them review your design, let them review your flows, let them point out some of the risks that could apply and then help you to implement some sort of controls before you go to market. This is one of the major areas where you find that software and hardware can be a bit different, right? You could do some iterative process for software where, okay, at this level, based on what we've seen at this stage, let us introduce this kind of controls, right, before you go to market. After you go to market, they continue to monitor the risk, they continue to monitor the numbers, they continue to monitor what is going on, right? What the regulator is demanding as well, right? And then help you to tweak your product to suit regulatory requirements. That's just like a brief overview I can give right on trend. We're also seeing some sort of changes, really, how compliance teams are set up. A lot of startups are not able to get separate personnel for legal, separate person for compliance, separate person for risk. So we are seeing it's been for like this for a lot of fair number of time, really. You see that you just hire one person to do the legal, risk, and compliance function. And that really comes with some of its own risk as well, right? You want to be sure that if you hire a lawyer, of course, most times you find that they hire a lawyer for that role because legal, only lawyer can provide it, right? But you also see that you have to be sure that the lawyer is also versed in compliance, at least to a reasonable level to guide you. Because even though the law involves compliance itself, right, you know how to interpret the law. There are some aspects of risk and compliance that would not come to a lawyer. So you know that the person you're getting is suitable to handle all three second line functions. Right. Yeah. So that's another thing I'd like to say about that. But I mean, a whole lot is going on. But I can just summarize it as regulators are beginning to stamp their waking up in Africa and ensuring that the safety of the financial system is guaranteed. And fintechs are not the reason for the collapse of our financial system. So yeah.
That's very important. Very important. Because I still know that sometimes people are still very skeptical about, putting a lot of money in some of these fintech, and you still see people still try to stick with their traditional bank. And when you have like huge sum of money, like millions of naira, you prefer to put it in something like GT Bank, and then you use fintech for maybe moving money here and there, transfers and all these kind of things. But it's
Yeah.
good to know that at least we are getting there in Africa, where I mean people can be confident in what we are, what we are building.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay, you mentioned that for startups, right, if you try and get like a house counsel, in-house counsel, like consult with compliance officers. So, for example, like I know there are some people that are, because I know, of course, this thing will cost. I mean, for to consult with anybody or consult with a compliance analyst or officer, professional, you have to pay a very good amount of money. So for starters, like a three, four, five people that are just coming together to just build something like that. How can those kind of people manage the process of compliance, even with limited resources? Are there specific ways to just manage it, even if you don't have so much budget to, pay like a very huge compliance professional like you?
Okay, that's a very good question. Really. It's an excellent question because we can see what's going on really in terms of the economy. We're looking at the fact that much of these startups have people that are really just bootstrapping and trying to like just put out their first MVP, maybe before they go get a raise or something. Yeah, so it's a very important thing to note. Now, I'm a strong believer in the fact that there's a lawyer or compliance professional for every pocket, right? Of course, it's not something that you're going to be offering something very insulting, but there are a lot of people that would, I mean, there are a number of people that really want to present incentives in some other ways. If they are buying in at an early stage and they are able to lock in or you believe in the potential that they bring to the team, I mean, you could consider giving them like some options to just, okay, as an incentive for your contribution to building the compliance program, and we'll give you this particular percentage or something, right? It's something that can be considered. It just depends on how well you're able to structure your incentives. I'm sure that there's a compliance person out there that will be willing to work with you based on your budget. I've seen a lot of people approach this very differently. Of course, there's always the fear of you don't want someone that just get the stock options and go. And that's why you need to structure it properly with a very good lawyer so that you can get the value within like a very good number of time before the options fully vest, right? That's for the options example. I'm seeing a lot of activity in the consulting side of things for compliance. It's no longer just the big four that are doing compliance services, compliance consulting service. You know, how the likes of PwC, Deloitte, PMG. I mean, you're gonna have to go to them with the big money, right? We're seeing some big outfits providing compliance services, the likes of Red Compass, the likes of A&D Forensics, and some other ones I really can't remember right now that would do it for you at a considerably lower fee than the big four would do it for you, or at least you could, I mean, negotiate some other forms of incentives that can, I mean, help you get the services that you need at that critical time. But some of them is just like just putting it forward, right? We'll do this for you. By the time you grow, believe that we also grow with you. And of course, you start to renegotiate the financial arrangements when maybe they raise or they get acquired or something like that. So yeah, I believe there's a legal and compliance person for every pocket. But even with that as well, you need to also properly plan towards structuring those, right, to get people that will fit the budget. Yeah.
Okay, great. In your experience so far, working with fintech, startup, maybe finance companies and all of that, what are those threats that you've seen that, is very, very, very common to most of probably the companies that you've worked for, like that you think maybe people coming up or companies who are still, maybe product managers, product teams, founders, need to like be careful about, so that they don't fall into the same trap, when it comes to, compliance. having to deal with CBN, deal with all the other form of regulators, that they are working with or that monitors their operation?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I work closely with product managers on my line of work because I do a lot of compliance work, product compliance, and I would say one major thing that I found to be common among many founders or even product managers is there is limited awareness of legal risk, right, that comes out of providing an unlicensed service, right? There's a whole lot of reliance on partnerships here and there, and no proper consideration of how it might impact your compliance risk in the countries where you're providing your services. And say, for instance, you want to provide a remittance service, and you know that for every places that you're going to be paying out to, need to be able to have some license or some partnership with licensed institutions there, right? Some of these you need to consider is whether, I mean, state of your partner itself, do they have a license, or you're partnering with someone that is riding on another person's license? That's one thing. There's also the whole question of whether such kind of partnerships are allowed in the places that you're trying to partner up with the company, right? Some places have some bar for such kind of partnerships. Some places require that to get regulatory approvals for those kind of partnerships, right? From a product manager perspective, it might seem like, oh, this is not really, you just want to do, you want to RDs, you want to do your business requirement documents, but it's also the part of the business that they need to start paying attention to. So I'm sure in one of some of my previous, I mean, in my previous session with Trevor, I discussed the unlicensed global service meet. It's not going to work. Second thing is, like I said earlier, regulators are starting to wake up in Africa, right? They've been, of course, they've been on, but they are getting a lot more interested in understanding how the fintech space works, right? A lot better. We are seeing licenses that are tailored to fintechs now. We're also starting to see some interest in understanding some of the new products, right? We see regulators coming to the table saying, okay, teach us crypto. We want to understand crypto. We want to understand the risk of crypto so that we can devise a regulation that fits your context properly. Right. For instance, in Nigeria, of course, next year, started licensing crypto companies. We're also starting to see some regulatory engagement with some other supervisory agencies, like the Nigerian Financial Intelligence, Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, and all that. In Kenya, we've also seen that they've also started to defer to their local community groups, right? The Kenyan community, the VASP Chamber of Commerce, and some of those interest groups that push for regulation, like proper contextual regulation of crypto assets. So regulators are different to these groups to help them understand the risk of each, I mean, this new technology product so that they can properly regulate it. While that does not really fall squarely inside compliance, it's very important to note for founders in these spaces because what you recommend is going to likely form part of what becomes your compliance obligations in future, right? So it's very important that there's some form of engagement, but you cannot engage if you don't know your context. So understand your risk, right, as a business. Understand, okay, what are the potential financial crime uses of this product and how can I stop it? How can the regulators help us to introduce some sort of sanity in this system and all that? That's for crypto, for all the new products, crowdfunding, crypto, robo-advisory. I've seen a lot of very new, innovative products in this space. I mean, including some of those that even adopt artificial intelligence. So help the regulators understand your business so that by the time the compliance obligations come, you'll be able to properly, you'll be in sync with the regulator. So that's another trend. We're also starting to see increased financial crimes supervision because some of the major African markets have been listed on grey lists, right? The grey list of the Financial Action Task Force is a list of countries with deficient compliance with international standards, right? The thing is, many countries, in terms of compliance, especially financial crimes compliance, there's a global standard for what your laws should contain, what is expected of your laws, right? So you find that even Money Laundering Act in Nigeria, the Process of Crime Act in Kenya, everything conforms to an international standard with some slight variations here and there, right? So there's been a lot of activity in Africa recently, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, to try to cover some of the gaps that have been identified in their systems that is contributing to that perception of a deficiency at the global stage. So from fintechs, especially, you need to start to consider putting yourself in a proper light, really, because when things like that happen, we find that regulators are always coming out. I mean, introducing new regulations, enforcing their prior regulations, and trying to just put their feet down. I mean, of course, they will drop the hammer on some as well, right? So there may be some sanctions and penalties if your compliance program is not robust enough to address the obligations that you have. So that's another trend we're seeing. Another thing I would say is a trend is there's a bit of, like I said, many compliance obligations, they conform to a global standard, right? But you find some slight local variations that can be very crucial. Right. For instance, there's a global standard for information security, the ISO 27001 standard, right? Of course, there are some other ones you could reference like that, but you find that in some countries or for some certain services, just getting one certification for your company would not work for all your branches in all those countries, right? For instance, in Ghana, I know that you need to have like a separate local certification for your Ghanaian entity rather than having a global certification for all your entities, right? So we are starting to see that, a lot of Nigerian fintechs, a lot of fintechs across Africa want to operate cross-border, right? They want to operate across a number of countries. So understanding the local context of regulations in each of these countries is very important to, maintaining your operations there. So yeah, I think those are some I can give off the top of my head for now.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Thank you for that. So you mentioned something around license and stuff. So I want to ask, like, is it possible that any company will want to operate without getting proper license, like within the fintech space? Is it possible? Have you seen cases like this?
So that's a really good question, and I would like to say that it's best you consult your lawyer. All right. The first advice I'll give is it's best you consult your lawyer. The classic lawyer response is it depends. It really depends on what the local legislation looks like. Some may permit partnerships, right? Some have like some sort of aggregator approach where they give the license to one aggregator who then brings every other company that wants to provide like a similar service under them. So there's a sort of like technology ecosystem where you just have everybody plugged into the aggregators. There's that model. But there are also other regulatory models, some of which allow for partnerships, some expressly prohibit partnerships, right? So it depends really on where you're going to launch your product, what the local law in that area says, and of course, the advice of your lawyers. But really, the best thing to do is when you want to introduce a new line of business, a new product, get your lawyers, right? Really speak to your lawyer, speak to your compliance person, let them advise you on your available options and best manner of approach. I'm sure a lot of them already do that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. My next question is, do you have like scenarios and examples of organizations that have run into problems, like, with in terms of compliance? What are those specific things, right? You've seen, that some companies, well, maybe we might not mention names, but then, I mean, what are those scenarios, and how does this affect product teams, companies building fintech, their team, their staff, like everybody, like at least their involvement, in cases like that. I mean, somebody should have noticed that, oh, this thing is not going the right way, or we're not doing the right thing, that kind of thing. So what are some of the like examples like you've seen companies that fell into that trap, and maybe the role or the implications of this for their team, or how did their team contributed to that?
Yeah, very, very good question, really. I'm trying to think of examples, right? But something I would like to say is in Africa, we don't really have that culture of publishing regulatory sanctions or regulatory penalties. I mean, when you compare it with other jurisdictions like maybe the UK, you almost get some of those notices every day, right, or like every week, right, where they say, oh, the FCA has really just fined Sterling Bank this amount of money for failure in their money laundering controls, right? But in Africa, it's not as widely publicized, and you don't really get those kind of regulatory actions in public. And I believe that some of the reasons is of course, to manage reputational risk, right? But I mean, infrequently you get some of those news that will just come and just see, oh, there's a fine here, there's a board sanction there or something like that. And some of those examples, I'm trying to think of one that will come very to mind. I really do not want to name names, right? But I'll talk about the microfinance banks, revocation of license of microfinance banks that happened, was it last year or 2022? Now, what happened there was, as at, I think, was it 2018 or 2019, the CBN released a circular requiring all microfinance banks to increase their shareholder capital to a certain limit, right? Depending on your tiers. So there are a good number of fintech products that are currently run on microfinance bank licenses. Look at Kuda Bank, for instance. Kuda Bank is a microfinance bank. It's a national microfinance bank in Nigeria. Ayowo is a microfinance bank. Rubies was a microfinance bank. I don't know if that's still up. And a whole lot of fintech products in Nigeria rely on microfinance bank licenses. So when that circular came out, of course, the next thing to do is trying to put yourself in compliance with the circular before the timeline, before the deadline that has been provided. Now, the CBN extended that deadline, I think, twice, right? I mean, this is something that has been coming from way back in I don't know if it was 2019 or 2020. I can't really recall the year it started. But a fair number of microfinance banks did not comply within that period. Some of them, of course, due to a difficulty in raising the funds. Some of them probably due to a failure of compliance. I really do not know. I can't tell the reason, right, from their own end. But aside from that, there are also other requirements for, okay, you need to keep an anti-money laundering, countering financing of terrorism program, and also file some reports and all that. So I think everything boiled together to a point where the CBN just put out a list of microfinance banks that they had revoked their licenses. Unfortunately, I think Ayowo was one of those banks that was affected. Of course, I believe they must have had like some other compliance issues, but some of this may have played part in the revocation of that license. I know they had a bank run kind of situation as well, where customers could not also withdraw their funds. This led to revocation of license, like I said, right? And that's one of the major consequences of non-compliance. Right? I mean, licenses are not cheap. Licenses come at a cost as well. So when you do not comply and you lose your license, you're losing some serious financial resources as well. But beyond that, there's also some reputational risk that comes with it. For instance, if your company's license was revoked and you go to another country, right, and you try to get a license there, some of those countries do some very serious due diligence, and if they see that your license has been revoked as well before, they will be asking additional questions or putting you on a wait list saying that's a high risk kind of candidate for this license. So some kind of reputational damage could also come from issues like that. Another thing is, I mean, you're going to incur a lot of financial cost if you do not comply, right? So we'll see some fines, regulatory fines and penalties. Unfortunately, like I said, they're not really publicized as you see in other jurisdictions. So it's hard to like pinpoint to one that, oh, this regulator find this or find that. So that's hard. I think another example I can give you is in relation to the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. Like I said earlier, if you're trying to provide a digital lending service, you need to register with them. They will ask you for some documents and all that. We started to see some regulatory action on that end as well. I think they even moved against the likes of Sokolon and some, I think, Okash and some other digital lending service providers like that to use a fair name for them, right? That's something that could potentially happen. That has happened in the past as well. We've also seen cases where the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission has written to Play Store, that's Google, or App Store, that's Apple, to ask them to disconnect digital lending service providers in Nigeria that are not on their list of registered practitioners. So that's another thing that's another example that I can give. For data protection compliance as well, I can also give you the example of the Nigerian Data Protection Commission issuing fines on banks and financial service providers that are non-compliant with the provisions of the Nigerian Data Protection Act and other data protection regulations in Nigeria. So there are some of these sparse examples. They are not as publicized as we would like, because that is what would encourage people to take their compliance more seriously. They happen. I mean, don't get me wrong, they happen. Maybe they are not publicized. I mean, I've seen an instance where there was one that was publicized and then taken down within maybe 1 hour, right? So these things happen. Regulatory fines happen. Regulatory penalties happen. Revocation of licenses happen. Disconnection of your application from your publishing store, app store, play store, it happens, right? Maybe not as publicized enough, but they happen. So it's really, really great to tend to your compliance programs, really. Yeah.
All right, that must be a lot. I'm trying to imagine like having to like take catch up with every like regulation that is out there. I think I was speaking with a product manager one time. I think that was around that our fintech masterclass, yeah. And she was saying that there are times that you don't even get to know that they already released something. You just find out somehow, like out of thin air, that's just something new. It's not like they send you like a formal forms that, oh yeah, we are sending you this email, or they are sending all the emails out to all the fintech companies, in Nigeria. So now that you are providing some context to it, like I can now like understand. So for companies now who missed out on all these important regulations, maybe they didn't see it when it was published. Does that mean that it is the compliance officer's duty to monitor stuff like that to ensure that the fintech companies don't miss out on any of those vital information or changes in regulation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say that yes. Now, it's dicey because I mean, even in the lawyer space, right? There's a popular saying that see, God forbid that day where a lawyer will know all the law, right? You may not know all the law, but you know where to find the law. And this points at, of course, getting skilled, competent persons to handle your compliance programs, and also some sort of synergy between all the teams in the company. Don't just think it's a compliance business alone to stay in compliance. So for compliance teams, right, we do something we call, an obligations register where you have like a compendium of the laws and regulations that bind your service, that bind your business. There are also service providers that can provide some of these tools to you where you can get like maybe a template version, right, that has extracted regulatory obligations for your company. That is always recommended and very helpful to track, okay, this is what we need to do for this is what we need to do for that. So it's very good for compliance teams. Now, in terms of new regulations, it's very good to have a proactive compliance team. So when you're proactive enough, some of those regulations, you would even be aware of it before an approved version is released, right? For instance, for the CBN, they release draft versions of a number of their regulations before the approved version comes out. So you're already even aware of what to expect, the timeline for when it's going to go in first and all that. But you need to be proactive enough to be able to maybe sit on the CBN website for when any new circular or any new regulation comes out. One strategy that I use and I recommend a lot for compliance teams is using a Google Alert system, right, or a web crawler to sit on some of these regulator websites. Your primary regulator website should be a place where you visit almost daily. Right? But aside from that, you can use Google Alerts to configure it for new updates, right? So when there's a new update involving the regulator, you can set it to like maybe a daily report or a weekly report or a monthly report. So you get some of those things so you're able to like stay abreast of new regulations. Now, that's for compliance teams. But oftentimes there's always that, I'm seeing some sort of like disconnect in fintechs where the compliance team is doing its own, the product team is doing its own, engineering team is doing its own, and everybody's working in silos. That is where the risk of, oh, we didn't know this applies, right? That's where it happens, right? You cannot afford to work in silos. Everybody should be able to build some team synergy so that compliance team can guide you on why what you're doing can cost the company in the future, right? Don't release a product until you get some compliance sign off. Some elements of product design really have some compliance implications. For instance, privacy by design, privacy by default. There's a reason why your default setting should not be that once you come on Zoom, your camera is on, right? It should not be that unless you've approved it, right? The default setting should be that your camera is off, your mic is off, right? It is now you that rule with your own hand, like turn them on. Those are some very subtle things in product design that they'll think because you're a compliance team, you don't know anything about products. You cannot guide them. But really, some of those things have legal implications. So it's always great to have some cross-functional work amongst all teams in the company for best compliance results. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. I mean that also affects marketing teams as well, so in terms of what they put out there.
Oh,
So now let me ask for compliance team, right? I know that this masterclass is focused on what's product managers, founders, compliance managers, are part of the people that can attend the masterclass, right?
yeah.
So what's the catch for them,
Yeah.
right? Because I know that some would say, "Oh, I'm a compliance manager already. Why should I be in this masterclass?" So do you want to talk from the perspective of why compliance officers should also be in this masterclass?
Well, so I would say this, right? I mean, it's not for the big time experts, right? I have bosses in this space, really, right? But for lawyers, I think it's very useful because there's always that assumption that if you're a lawyer, you can also work in, like, you can just take up a compliance role, but it's usually not the case, right? So a lot of people have just been thrown into the space without like a proper background into how compliance works and some of the intricacies, right? For instance, risk assessment and just putting in place some sort of compliance frameworks internally, right? This goes beyond law, right? Some of these are very, very functional. How are you able to assess risk? How can you look at a product and say, okay, this is riskier than this other one? This is the kind of control that I want to put in place to manage the risk. This is not something they will teach you in law school, right? I went to law school. I'm a lawyer myself, and I know how much learning I had to like pick up, right? Some of my seniors and mentors in the industry. So I think it's going to be very useful for lawyers who do not have like a prior background in compliance. If you do have a prior background in compliance, it could also be helpful because I'm going to be sharing some of my own experiences. And this is something I think is very important in the compliance industry. Information sharing on trends that you're seeing, on some potential exposures, how you've been handling it, some of your approaches to getting executive buy-in to some of your compliance initiatives. So I'm going to be sharing some from my own perspective. I'm also looking forward to hearing from people's perspectives as well. That is for people that have some experience in compliance. What are you facing? What are some strategies that you adopted that you don't think is really mainstream that you think that other people can use? I'll be sharing some from my own perspective as well. And I think something I bring to the table that is not so that you wouldn't really say is popular, right? It's a crypto compliance approach. So I'm specialized in financial crimes compliance. I hold certifications across both traditional finance and crypto asset compliance. And it's rather rare, really, in Africa to have like they're just a very limited group of people with that currently in Africa. So I'll be able to share some tips, some practices that we've been adopting in the space even before the regulators started to catch up and some of the things that we use to manage our own risk as an industry. So that's something that you can expect to learn as well. But really, I look forward to having a fun time. I'm not keen on just having a old slide-based approach where it's just narrative on narrative, but we're going to have spots where we actually have a conversation. Really, I think that's the best way to learn compliance, and they can really expect to have that as well.
Okay, awesome. So, and also, let me ask for product managers, founders, and all these other people that are within fintech. What can they also expect to? I know you've said some things about it, and I think a part of the compliance stuff managers actually can be picked, okay, for other people. So, but do you have specific messages, for these people? What can they expect from your session? What can they take away, to improve their processes?
Yeah, so for that, I would say for product managers, I really like it when product managers take my compliance classes or sessions, right? Because I think they work the closest with compliance teams, right? And that's why I feel like it's going to be super useful for them because it helps you build some compliance awareness as a product manager to be able to even spot some things before it even gets to compliance table. Now, I've worked with a number of product managers that they've grown so used to speaking with me so much so that they see some things that they just come to my DM that to ask me, is this legal? Is this something that we can do? I suspect that it might not be something we can do. What do you think? Right. And I mean, I'm able to confirm there and then I think you guys are already good. Let's just co-opt you into the compliance team. Right. I think this is going to be very useful for people who are otherwise, I mean, who are in the business function, right, to be able to have build some compliance awareness that can guide them, I mean, or at least to make some intuitive sort of like decisions, right? Or to be able to escalate correctly to your compliance teams, how you can work with your internal compliance team to get the best compliance results for your business. So yeah, building the awareness, building compliance awareness in your business side of things is something that you can really expect to learn from this masterclass. And I really look forward to speaking to them as well.
All right, thank you. So I mean that also goes for developers and designers alike, right?
Yeah. So I think, let me give you the background here. There's something we call the three lines of defense model in compliance. Believe that compliance is not just a business of the compliance team alone. It's a business of everybody, right? And in the three lines of defense model, the business function is the first line, right? They defend the company from compliance risk, really, or like, I mean, regulatory fines, penalties, financial crimes, or defend the company from fraudsters, defend the company from people that want to use the business or the fintech to commit financial crimes. That business line it consists of every other function aside from legal, risk, compliance, and audit, right? So you see engineering, products, customer support, even some of your tech tools, like onboarding tools and all that, they fall in that first line of defense. So the first line that the risk would interact with, right, is pretty much the business function. And who are those in this business function? Those we've mentioned, products, managers, engineers, and all that. So it's very important that, and that's why regulators really hammer on it, right? That you build some awareness in that first line so that what is going to be coming through is going to be limited from that first line, and then compliance will be able to, tackle what comes through. Legal risk and compliance sits on the second line. So we are like, you know how battle strategies work. You must have seen some of those movies where you have a set of people in front and you have some of the senior generals at the back, right? Like here at the back. Yeah. So these people are going to be like the first point of call for some serious compliance risk, right? They should be able to know how to engage some of them. They should be able to know when to escalate to the compliance team to handle, okay, this is beyond my training, right? What do you guys think, right? Of course, some level of decision making also has to be based on compliance recommendation and board approval. So building awareness of your role in the compliance framework is going to be something else I'm going to be learning. You're going to be learning from the master class, so I think it's really important for that.
Thanks. Thumbs up. Thank you very much. So what's the
Well
typical days
done.
like for you? Typical compliance, big work, where you have like that plenty work or that time when it's hot.
So the thing with compliance is, right, yeah, you would have some regular days, but there are times you have some very irregular days, right? You might have to go put out fire somewhere or something like that, right? My own personal routine is once I come on, I try to, so, part of the rule of compliance is managing escalations from the first line. Like I said, right? You get all these escalations from the customer onboarding team, or help us look at this profile. We think this is suspicious, or we think this does not match, or just escalations from the first line, from the customer support or onboarding team. Right. I typically like to start my day with any pending escalations, right? If there's anything, because, in some teams, if you work in some teams, they work like around the clock, right? So some of those things might have even come in maybe 2 a.m., 3 a.m. I start up my day by working on them so that I can just get that out of the way. Then next is I probably have some meetings scheduled already. I like to push my meetings to later in the day because I feel like mornings are when my head is like the clearest. So I like to do the hands-on stuff. But sometimes you just get out some of these errands, especially due to time zone issues. So I have to take some calls like that. Then I also work on some pending compliance tasks, like maybe I'm working on a risk assessment, or I'm doing some sort of remediation or doing some self-assessment, stuff like that. I do that as well. Then I also proceed to transaction monitoring. I manage transaction monitoring process, right? So I go to the tools, I look at the alerts that we have, and I start to like review some of the alerts that we have. Okay, is this activity suspicious? What are some of the red flags relating to this activity or this particular financial flow? Do I need to file a report with the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit or not? Right? Those are some of like the issues that pop up. right? There are also like sometimes might need to have like some sort of internal reporting, right, to the board on certain matters relating to risk. For instance, if a politically exposed person is trying to onboard, I can't approve the onboarding as compliance person. I have to be able to recommend to the board that based on our assessment of this person's risk, we think you should onboard or we think you should not onboard. So the board now decide based on the recommendations we've made. So escalations like that or recommendations like that to the board also for like you frequently get that in your day-to-day work. Of course, managing partner expectations as well. It's usually it's not something that you really find to be like a fixed routine. It's pretty much just, this is the program we're working on at this time. Doing now is trying to do those things that have been recommended in your audit report. So maybe for like the 1 or 2 months after that audit, you're working on remediation, right? Aside from the usual day-to-day tasks, responding to escalations from your frontline team, right? Or that, right? That happens. There's also the routine reference from product as well. Say they are working on a new product, they want you to review. You may need to conduct a privacy impact assessment on that new product. You may need to conduct, if it's a entirely new product, you might need to conduct some financial crimes risk assessment on that product. And then, but some of those things are not usually day to day. It's something that will come maybe infrequently. Maybe this month you have a new product you're working on. Next month you're working on your remediation project. Or if you're going to be having a very interesting month, you have everything in a month for you. So yeah, it's very irregular, but the regular parts are managing escalations from the front line, reviewing transaction monitoring alerts, and then dispositioning those alerts, determining whether you need to file to law enforcement or whether you need to just log it internally. Also training and awareness. Sometimes you need to do some sort of training for your teams. You can have a company-wide training, you can have a board training, can have a department-based training that you just try to put in. Okay, what's the context of this department? What do they need to know about our policies and procedures and all that? You'll also be working on policies and procedures, reviewing your policy and procedure. It's recommended that you do it annually, right? So can be taking a look at it, what has changed in the law that you need to implement your internal policy. What are the things that you're seeing in your company's risk environment that you need to start to make some changes to your policies to address, right? So those are some of the things that will typically come up in your day as a compliance professional. Does this sound very interesting? Is this something
It
you'd
is
like to try?
interesting. Oh, I don't know if I want to, but then there's a part of me that likes, I think I like something around quality stuff. I like to monitor things. I like to make sure that it is perfect, that kind of thing, you understand? So maybe if I
Yeah,
decide to try something around that, maybe compliance would have been a good stuff for me. Yeah.
same for you. Yeah.
So thank you so much for granting the interview. I enjoyed the conversation and it's also enlightened me. Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much.
much.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your weekend.
And
All
you as
right.
well. Yeah. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.